They told me I wasn't worth the seat I was sitting in, then laughed as they dared me to walk out if I didn't like it. In that moment, every pair of eyes around the table dropped to their laptops, pretending not to hear the humiliation, the kind of casual cruelty that makes you question your own sanity. But what they didn't know, what nobody in that room even imagined, was that buried deep in my contract was something they should have feared from the very beginning. If this kind of workplace injustice hits close to home, subscribe and tell me your story in the comments. I didn't plan on standing up in that boardroom. I didn't plan on making a scene or proving a point or confirming every stereotype they whispered about emotional women in tech. All I wanted was a straight answer about why my project deadlines were being reassigned without my approval. But Blake Renshaw didn't believe women deserved explanations. He believed we deserved instructions. So when I calmly asked why he had pulled my team off the AURORA Engine prototype, a system I had spent 9 years shaping, refining, and defending, he leaned back in his leather chair, crossed his arms, and smirked like I just asked him to explain algebra to a toddler. "Julia," he said, stretching my name like bubblegum. "If you don't like how things are run here, the door's right there. Don't trip on your way out." The room went silent, not the kind of silence that shows shock or solidarity. No, this was the silence of strategy. Every executive suddenly fascinated by their coffee cup or their keyboard because they didn't want to be associated with a woman being publicly put in her place. Nobody defended me. Not one voice rose to say Blake was out of line, and maybe that hurt more than the insult itself. My team, people I had mentored, supported, fought for, sat frozen like mannequins. I could feel heat crawling up my neck. Not embarrassment exactly, but a kind of disbelief that after nearly a decade of giving everything I had to Helixion systems, this was how they spoke to me. This was the value of 9 years of 70-hour weeks, missed holidays, late-night emergency calls, and the patented architecture they had built half their product line on. Blake expected me to sit back down, swallow the humiliation, and nod like a chastened intern. He expected me to stay quiet the same way I had stayed quiet for years, when credit went to the loudest man in the room, when promotions mysteriously skipped over me, when my raises were restructured due to budget constraints, while younger men were hired at higher salaries. He thought this moment would be no different. But something inside me shifted, something that snapped with a clean, almost peaceful finality. I stood up, slowly, deliberately. The legs of my chair made a soft, dragging sound across the carpet that somehow felt louder than Blake's insult. His smirk widened. He thought he'd won. He thought he had pushed me exactly where he wanted me. Out, defeated, small. "Okay," I said. Just one word. Calm, controlled. Measured in a way he couldn't read. I saw confusion flicker in his eyes for a split second, the moment he realized I wasn't bluffing. I picked up my notebook, slid my pen into the spiral, and walked out of the conference room without another word. The hallway was cold, too bright, too quiet. Every step away from that boardroom felt like peeling off a heavy layer I didn't even know I'd been carrying. I didn't stop to say goodbye. I didn't look back. I headed straight to my office on the 3rd floor and began packing my things. My diplomas, the photo of my mother, the coffee mug my junior engineers gave me, the prototype chip I'd been analyzing. My hands shook, but not from fear. It was relief. It was finally breathing after years of holding my breath. Blake thought he had pushed me out of the building. He had no idea he had just pushed me toward the one thing he could never control, my next move. I drove home in a daze, not crying, not raging, just hollow in that strange way your chest feels after you rip out something infected. Austin traffic crawled along the highway, and for once I didn't care. I wasn't rushing to make a meeting or beat a deadline or jump on a 4 p.m. call someone else decided at 3:59. I just let the city move around me, the skyline rising and falling between overpasses. By the time I pulled into the lot outside my South Congress apartment, the shock had settled into a quiet, unnerving calm. I carried my box upstairs, set it on the kitchen table, and stood there staring at it as if it belonged to someone else. The diplomas, the mug, the framed photo, they all looked like relics from a life I wasn't sure I wanted back. I made tea, sat down, and finally let myself breathe. But when the steam faded, the question settled in. What now? And beneath that question, something sharper flickered. A memory, a line of text, a negotiation I had nearly forgotten. I opened my personal laptop, the one I had bought with my own money after Helixion refused to upgrade my work machine for 2 years, and clicked through a maze of neatly labeled folders until I found what I was looking for. Employment Contract Final Signed not PDF. My heart drummed faster, not because I expected anything miraculous, but because I remembered the stubbornness of the woman I had been at 27. A woman who had watched too many engineers lose the rights to the ideas they built. A woman who had refused to sign without protections, even when Helixion's early managers said, "We don't usually add clauses like that." A woman Blake never bothered to understand. I scrolled past page after page of corporate formality until I found the exact line I hoped wasn't just a figment of memory. Section 14, subsection C, paragraph 2. I read it once, then twice, then a third time out loud, just to hear the words in the air. In the event of voluntary or involuntary separation, excluding termination for cause, all intellectual property created by the employee shall revert to the employee's sole ownership if Helixion Systems has not executed a formal patent assignment within 30 days of the patent's approval date. My tea went cold, my pulse warmed. They hadn't filed the assignment. I knew this because I had asked. Repeatedly, it had been in review, pending legal, stuck with compliance. Then 9 months passed, then an acquisition, then a departmental shuffle, and somewhere in that chaos, the AURORA Engine quantum authorship assignment had disappeared into a black hole everyone assumed would eventually fix itself. But it never had. And now I had walked out voluntarily, not fired for cause, not laid off, not reprimanded, voluntarily, which meant, according to the contract, according to their own legal language, the patent for AURORA, the architecture generating $380 million a year, was legally mine, not theirs. I didn't cheer. I didn't scream. I didn't even smile. Not yet. Instead, I forwarded the contract to my lawyer Marisol Vega with a single message. "We need to talk. Urgent." She called me within 5 minutes, her voice crisp and more alert than any lawyer should reasonably be at 6 p.m. "Julia, tell me everything." I explained the timeline, the missing assignment, the precise approval date, the emails confirming delays, the fact that Blake had effectively pushed me out with a dare. Marisol didn't interrupt. She just listened in that razor-sharp way she had, as though weighing every detail on a legal scale only she could read. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then she exhaled slowly. "Julia, you understand what you're holding, right? If your dates are correct, and they look correct, Helixion doesn't own AURORA. You do." My fingers tightened around the phone. What happens next? Another pause, then her voice shifted into the tone she only used when something seismic was about to happen. "Next, I file a formal ownership claim with the Patent Office, tonight, and I inform Helixion that you are exercising your contractual rights." I stared at the contract on my screen, at my own signature written years earlier. "And what will they do?" Marisol let out a low, knowing hum. Panic. Marisol didn't waste a second. The moment we ended the call, she drafted the ownership notice, attached the contract excerpts, cross-referenced the patent approval date, and submitted everything before the clock hit midnight. I sat on my couch, legs tucked under me, watching the email confirmations roll in like quiet explosions. Nothing dramatic happened right away, of course. Corporations don't scream, they reverberate. And the first tremor hit at 7:42 the next morning. I was still in pajamas, hair a mess, halfway through pouring cereal, when my phone buzzed with a call from a number I recognized. Instantly, Helixion Systems Legal Affairs. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, another call. Different extension, same department, then another and another. By the fourth one, I actually laughed. It wasn't joy. It was the disbelief of someone watching a storm form exactly where she predicted it would. When the sixth call rolled in before 9 a.m., I finally listened to a voicemail. "Julia, this is Raymond from Helixion Legal. We need to discuss an urgent matter regarding the AURORA patent. Please return our call immediately. Polite, controlled, nervous. The seventh call was from a senior counsel who tried to sound calm, but failed halfway through, his voice tightening like someone was standing behind him. I ignored that one too. At 9:27, my phone rang again, and this time, the name on the screen made me pause. Blake Renshaw. If he had shown up at my door, he couldn't have been more predictable. I didn't answer, but I listened to the voicemail. Julia, he began, already irritated. We seem to have a misunderstanding about some paperwork. Call me back so we can clear this up. Misunderstanding. That word. God, that word nearly made me choke on my coffee. A man who smirked as he publicly belittled me now, trying to shrink a multi-million-dollar catastrophe into a misunderstanding. By 10:15, I had 12 missed calls. At 10:30, my phone lit up again, this time with a name I hadn't expected. Victor Hale, interim CEO. Victor wasn't a bad man, just a detached one, the kind who focused on shareholder calls and acquisition meetings and rarely noticed the people writing the code fueling the stock price. I considered ignoring him too, but something in my gut said this was the call to pick up. Julia, he said, not bothering with small talk. I'm sure you've seen the emails. I have, I replied, stirring the coffee I no longer wanted. Then you know why I'm calling. His voice was tight, stripped of the corporate polish I was used to. The notice you filed, this can't be correct. It is. Legal had 9 months to believe something. I cut in. They didn't file the assignment. Silence. The heavy kind. The kind where someone on the other end is staring at a conference table full of executives who suddenly realize they've stepped onto thin ice. Julia, Victor said finally, this patent anchors the majority of our product line. If what you're asserting holds up, Helixion is exposed, severely. Our board needs to know this isn't retaliatory. It isn't, I said simply. It's contractual. Another silence, longer this time. Can you come in so we can discuss options? No, I said. I'm not coming back into that building. Then what are you asking for? The question hung there like a wire pulled tight. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because the truth was, I didn't have to ask for anything. Not until they understood exactly how deep their problem ran. But Victor wasn't the only one who could sense the leverage shifting. The next call wasn't from legal or leadership or compliance. It was from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Dana Pierce, chair of the board. Her voice was level, controlled in a way that meant the building behind her was metaphorically on fire. Julia, she said, I need to understand what you want before this escalates. I set my coffee down, feeling the center of gravity tilt. Dana, I said, this escalated the moment Blake told me to walk out. And for the first time, she didn't have a script ready, not a rebuttal, not a plan. Just silence, the sound of a corporation realizing the person they underestimated most was the one person they couldn't afford to lose. The storm had officially hit, and I was the eye of it. Dana didn't waste time on pleasantries. People like her never do when the ground starts cracking under their feet. Julia, she said, breath steady but thinner than usual. Before this becomes a full-scale crisis, I need clarity. Are you claiming exclusive rights to AURORA? I walked to my window, looking down at South Congress waking up. Joggers, coffee lines, people living lives that didn't involve multi-million-dollar implosions. I'm claiming exactly what my contract gives me, I said, ownership. She inhaled sharply, probably realizing that meant Helixion currently had zero legal right to manufacture or sell any device using the architecture. Julia, attempting to enforce that would freeze our operations. You know the scale of the impact? I do, I said, better than anyone. Another long pause. Then let's find a solution. I didn't respond, letting the silence settle. People in power hate silence. It's the one thing they can't dominate. Our legal department is reviewing options, she continued carefully. But if this goes into litigation, you'll lose, I said calmly. It'll take years. Your stock will fall before the first hearing. Your partners will pull out. Your manufacturing contracts will collapse, and your investors will demand heads. I could practically hear her jaw clench. I wasn't threatening her. I was simply stating facts. Facts she knew. Facts they'd all ignored while treating me like a disposable technician. "What do you want?" she asked finally, voice tightening around the words. That was the real beginning of the negotiation. Not the calls, not the emails, not the panic. This moment, when the board chair asked what I wanted, not what I deserved or what they could offer. "I'm willing to license AURORA to Helixion," I said, non-exclusive, 12-year term, 8.5 million annually, paid quarterly, no restrictions on my own development. The silence that followed was so long I wondered if the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, the key, steel was back in her voice. "That's an unreasonable number." "It's significantly less than what the patent generates for you every year," I said. "It's also your only path forward." "We could challenge the contract," she countered. "Argue intent. Argue implied assignment. Argue that your work was created using company resources." "You can," I said. "And in the meantime, every chip you manufacture exposes you to liability. You'll bleed out before a judge ever sees your filings." I wasn't being cruel. I wasn't being vindictive. I was simply done pretending that being polite made me safer. "Julia," she said slowly, "I want to avoid an outcome that harms both sides." "Then accept the terms," I replied, "or make a counteroffer." She exhaled sharply, a sound halfway between frustration and resignation. "5 million per year, 10-year term, exclusive rights." I actually laughed, not maliciously, but in disbelief. "Dana, you're asking me to sell the keys to my future at a discount." "We need assurances," she insisted. "Our investors need stability," I cut in. "And my offer gives you stability. What you're asking gives me nothing." 5 million is insulting, I finished for her. "And you know it." She didn't argue. 7 million, she tried, exclusive. 9 million, I countered instantly, 12-year term, non-exclusive. Right of first refusal on related patents. That's the deal. "We can't compete if you license the same architecture to our rivals." "Then build something better," I said. That did it. She fell silent again, and in that quiet space, I realized the board wasn't negotiating for leverage anymore. They were negotiating for survival. "I need time to discuss with the board," she said, her voice smaller but more honest. 48 hours, I replied. "After that, every day of delay costs you more leverage." She didn't argue, she just hung up. The next 2 days were strangely calm. I took long walks around the lake, cooked dinner, watched the sunset from my balcony. Helixion called a dozen more times. I ignored every call. Whatever they were deciding behind closed doors, it was their problem, not mine. On the morning of the third day, Dana called again. Her voice was controlled but softer than before. "Julia," she said, "the board has reviewed your proposal. We accept your terms, with one addition, right of first refusal on future neural processing patents filed in the next 5 years." I nodded to myself. Expected, reasonable, measured, agreed. "We'll have the contract drafted by Tuesday." "Make sure Marisol receives a copy first," I said. "Nothing gets signed until she approves it." "Of course." She hesitated. "And Julia, what happened with Blake was unacceptable. I'm sorry." It wasn't an apology that fixed anything, but it was the first, honest thing Helixion had said in years. After she hung up, I stood there in my quiet apartment, surrounded by boxes I hadn't unpacked, holding a future they never meant for me to have. They thought they had dared me into submission, but all they had done was dare me into power. The contract was signed on a Tuesday afternoon inside a glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Austin. I walked in wearing the same calm expression I'd had the day Blake tried to humiliate me, but this time the power sat squarely in my hands. Helixion's lawyers looked exhausted, defeated, resigned to the reality they'd created for themselves. When the final signature landed on the dotted line, a strange wave moved through me. Not triumph, not revenge, but relief. A door had closed behind me, and a much bigger one had opened. The first quarterly payment hit my business account 17 days later, $2,125,000. The number didn't feel real at first. It wasn't the money itself, it was the validation. The undeniable proof that everything I'd built had worth far beyond what Helixion ever acknowledged. After staring at the screen long enough to convince myself it wasn't a glitch, I did the one thing I had been itching to do since leaving the company. I started calling the people who mattered, the people who actually built things, the ones overlooked, undervalued, or suffocated by the very culture Blake embodied. I didn't have to pitch hard. When I reached Tessa Lynn and told her I was forming a new company, NovaCore Labs, she said, "Finally," and asked when she should pack her desk. Omar Ruiz didn't even wait for me to finish explaining before he said, "I'm in," like he'd been rehearsing it. And Kiara Boyd, who had spent years being told she was too junior to lead anything, asked one question: "Do we get to build without politics?" When I said yes, she replied, "Then I'll bring my whole brain." Within 2 weeks, the four of us were standing inside a vacant 1,400-square-foot office space near the Austin Tech District that smelled like dust and old carpet glue. The walls were scuffed, the lights flickered, and the HVAC clanked like it was held together with duct tape. But to me, it looked like freedom. We spent the first few days buying used desks, hauling in whiteboards, and setting up a cheap but serviceable coffee station. Every night we stayed late, sketching architectures on glass walls, debating algorithms, and laughing in ways we never had inside Helixion's suffocating hallways. There was an energy in that space, a hum of possibility, that reminded me why I started building technology in the first place. Aurora had been my past, but the AURORA Engine was just the starting point. What I wanted now required ambition, courage, and the people who understood my vision better than anyone else. So we began designing something new, something cleaner, faster, more stable. A system capable of outpacing the architecture Helixion was still clinging to with both hands. We named it Aurora X, the next generation of quantum-integrated microarchitecture. And unlike the original, this one was ours from day one. No forgotten paperwork, no smirking executives, no one telling us where we belonged. The first month was nothing glamorous, just code, calculations, prototype failures, late-night debugging, and a lot of tacos eaten over laptops. But it was honest work we owned. Around week 6, Kiara looked up from her monitor, eyes wide, and whispered, "Julia, I think the power consumption dropped by 37%. I checked the data. She was right. That single improvement meant Aurora X was no longer just a passion project. It was viable, marketable, potentially transformative. And while I didn't say it out loud, one thought pulsed in the back of my mind. Helixion had no idea what was coming. A month after Kiara's breakthrough, the atmosphere inside NovaCore shifted. We were no longer 4 people in a half-renovated office playing with ideas. We were holding something real, something powerful enough to change our trajectory. Word travels fast in tech, even when you're not trying to be loud. Investors started sniffing around after a patent filing quietly linked my name to a new quantum-integrated design. I wasn't interested, not yet. Money was the one thing we actually had thanks to Helixion's quarterly payments. What we needed was proof. Credibility, a partner willing to take a chance on something untested but promising. That chance came from a small medical imaging company in Houston, ClearScan Diagnostics. They weren't giants, but they were smart, hungry, and tired of relying on outdated processing units that couldn't handle modern imaging loads. When I walked them through our prototype and showed them Aurora X's power management curve, the CTO's eyebrows shot up fast enough to make me bite back a grin. "What do you want for a pilot?" he asked. He signed a modest contract, $200,000 for an early integration test. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was everything we needed: validation, our first real customer. I drove back to Austin with the signed agreement sitting on the passenger seat like a newborn. When I walked into the office and laid the contract on the table, Tessa screamed, Omar fist pumped, and Kiara burst into tears she tried to deny later. We celebrated with cheap champagne, greasy pizza, and a lot of "I can't believe this is happening." Success didn't erase the past, but it finally felt like something was replacing it. Of course, moments like that never happen without someone trying to ruin them. 2 months into the ClearScan pilot, we were hit with a patent infringement claim. Not from Helixion, though part of me expected that shoe to drop eventually, but from a competitor desperate to stay relevant. Their filing was flimsy, laughably sloppy, an obvious attempt to slow us down. But even a baseless lawsuit drains time, drains energy, drains attention. I sent everything to Marisol immediately. 3 days later, she called, irritation sharpening every word. "Julia, they copied you. The timeline proves it." She was right. Our documentation preceded theirs by 18 months. We had prototypes, timestamps, logs, truth measured in lines of code and circuit diagrams. But truth doesn't stop a corporation from trying. The legal battle dragged for months, depositions, hearings, filings. It was exhausting, but it hardened us. When the judge dismissed the lawsuit with prejudice, citing the competitor's frivolous and obstructive intent, our whole team watched the ruling stream live from the conference room. Omar shouted. Tessa cried. Kiara whispered, "We actually won." That victory didn't just protect Aurora X, it put NovaCore on the map. Suddenly, companies that wouldn't take my calls when I worked under Blake were reaching out, asking for demos. Industry forums were mentioning our architecture, analyst blogs debated our pipeline, and invitations to conferences arrived weekly. Word spread. NovaCore wasn't a fluke. And somewhere in that rising noise, an email arrived from a name I hadn't seen in years. Ethan Klein, Helixion's new CEO, asking if we could meet. Not to threaten, not to reclaim anything, but to talk about partnership. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had once dared me to leave. Now they were knocking on my door. Ethan arrived at our office on a quiet Thursday morning, the kind where sunlight hit the glass just right and made the whole place look bigger than it was. He didn't bring an entourage or a legal team, just a notebook and a tired expression that told me he understood exactly what he was walking into. We sat in the small conference room near the front, the same one where we'd watched the lawsuit dismissal months earlier. He didn't waste time with flattery or corporate pleasantries. "Julia," he said, "Helixion can't keep building the future on yesterday's architecture. I'm hoping we can start over." Start over. The words felt strange, almost out of place after everything that had happened. But I wasn't the same woman who had sat silent in Helixion's boardroom. I had nothing left to prove to them, and everything to protect. We talked for nearly an hour. No accusations, no bargaining. Just two people trying to figure out whether the damage of the past could be separated from the future. I didn't forgive the company, not really, but I recognized sincerity when I heard it, and Ethan wasn't Blake. He wasn't pretending power he didn't have or hiding fear behind arrogance. He was trying to rebuild something broken long before he arrived. In the end, I agreed to one thing: a limited right of first refusal on future neural processing patents. No exclusivity, no control, no ownership. Just a fair chance to make an offer before anyone else. It was balance, clean, simple, and mutual. 2 weeks later, the final licensing payment from the original agreement landed in NovaCore's account, $2,125,000, the last piece of the 12-year, $102 million deal they never expected to pay. I stared at the confirmation on my screen, remembering the moment Blake smirked at me, telling me the door was right there. I didn't slam that door in his face. I walked through it, quietly, steadily, with nothing but my dignity and a dusty clause he never bothered to read. And on the other side was everything they said I didn't deserve: freedom, power, and a company that finally reflected the value I always had. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes when someone finally shows you how little they value you. I used to think loyalty meant staying quiet, working harder, proving myself over and over until the right people noticed. But this journey taught me something different. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from a room where you're not respected. I learned that contracts matter, preparation matters, and protecting your work isn't selfish. It's survival. And the truth is, revenge doesn't always need to be loud or dramatic. Mine wasn't. I didn't scream or sabotage or try to burn the building down. I just enforced what already belonged to me. Blake lost his position, the company paid what it owed, and I built something better. That was enough. But the deeper lesson is this: forgiveness can free you, but silence can cut deeper than any confrontation. I didn't forgive Blake, but I didn't let him live in my head either. I let consequences speak in the place of anger, and that's something I think a lot of people, especially in the American workplace, need to hear. You don't have to destroy someone to rise. You just have to stop letting them define your worth. If you're stuck somewhere you're undervalued, trapped under managers who dismiss you, or afraid to take the next step, my advice is simple. Don't wait for permission to build the life you want. Start documenting your work, know your contracts, protect your ideas, and when the moment comes, don't be afraid to choose yourself. How to get started today. Write down the value you bring. Review any agreements or policies that affect your work. Make a list of skills you want to strengthen this year. Take one action, just one, that moves you toward independence, whether that's updating your resume, setting boundaries, or starting a small side project. If this story resonated with you, comment with your own experience, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more stories like this.